Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 1 discussion. Welcome to some discussion of the upcoming patch 3.29.2. This is expected to come out New Zealand Thursday time, so that is anywhere realistically up to about 18 hours after I'm making this video, but potentially something earlier than that as well. Of course, like any patch, it could be delayed. Now, this is going to be a really substantial improvement to a couple of specific things that have been pain points. Firstly, there are going to be improvements to the Abyss regular monster loot that exists at the moment. The changes Grinding Gear Games have already made to the chests that come out of Abyss aren't too bad. So Abyss does have a purpose for existing again at the moment. It's not necessarily a great mechanic prior to this, but it is something that does have a few things that you can get from it, and it doesn't feel terrible to run. However, what they're going to be doing is making it so that the regular monsters that you kill from it, or more precisely, the elite monsters that you kill from it, more on that distinction later, those are going to have substantially more rewards, but at the same time, they're also going to be substantially tougher. And there'll be more ways to juice them up further by using some of the rarer scarabs that are tied to the Abyss mechanic. On top of this, there are some changes that are coming to Legion as a mechanic. Now, these are going to be really interesting as well, because you are not always going to want to use these. More on that in a sec. There are some new options for Legion. For certain types of crafts, this will be a big improvement, but for certain Legion crafts, it will actually be worse to use the new options. There's a number of small changes that are being made to other content areas in the game, and then the 329 specific Allflame content, moist maps, whatever you want to call it. This is going to be getting some juicing options that go beyond the current limits of that content. However, I do think it's important to note that not all of the changes they want to make to the moist maps are going to make it into 329 too. So there's going to be some upgrades to the altar encounters that you'll find. These are going to be rarer but better. But at the same time, the changes that are going to be made to juicing options beyond that to Voyages, things that take them meaningfully beyond 8 mod tier 16 maps and to be more difficult than that, those are going to come at a later patch. That's likely to be next week. So let's go through everything, starting with the changes coming to Abyss. Firstly, elite enemies. Elite enemies are the ones that have more than typical hit points for a monster. The ones that are spawned by Abyss pits, they're going to have higher effectiveness than they've got at the moment. Effectiveness is a stat that Path of Exile 2 started using that has probably been backported already silently to Path of Exile 1. What it means is just that these monsters are kind of like Path of Exile 1's mini Brutuses. They're tougher than another monster of the same rarity in their zone, and they also drop considerably better loot. I believe they also award more XP as well, but that's something that I'm not 100% certain of. Well, these elite monsters, the ones that are spawned by the Abyss pits, they're going to have more of this stat. Now, I don't know how much they've got currently, and I don't know how big this change is. This was the change, however, that when it took place in patch 0.4.0 of Path of Exile 2, it ended up really breaking things because Grinding Gear Games dialed the numbers up too high. So suddenly you went from a fully juiced up temple, maybe dropping 4 divine orbs prior to that change, all the way up to dropping literally dozens of them after that change. And it got to the extent that really divine orbs almost ceased to be loot entirely in Path of Exile 2 during that patch. So we don't know how much they're going to be turning the dial on this. Realistically, I feel it's the sort of thing that a 25% more multiplier is probably really safe on, and a 50 to 100% more multiplier, that's when you might start seeing this going away from, yeah, Abyss is a serviceable, but maybe one of the weaker mechanics, to Abyss is the spot to get loot and everything else feels really bad. They're also going to make it though so that there are more elite spawning from Abyss pits as well. Now, the important thing here is that these two changes stack multiplicatively with each other. If you go from 5 monsters that each have 200% effectiveness up to 6 monsters that each have 300% effectiveness, you've ended up adding 80% more loot, 80% more XP, a whole lot of things that are really substantial there. Additionally, for builds that have really good screen coverage, and particularly if you've got explosions, you might find that having more of these monsters actually doesn't really make things much harder. In fact, in some cases, it might even make it easier because you've got kills that are propagating through packs, and kill propagation methods tend to be more reliable the more monsters that you've got. So, Abyss definitely getting a substantial buff there. That's the first one. Then the second one relates to the Abyss Scarab of Crystals. Now, this is the one that causes abyssal pits in the area to spawn abyssal crystals. However, the current incarnation of this is turned off when that abyssal pit instead is going to provide a chest. So you go through a map and you do everything in the abyss and you find, okay, well, the first one didn't give me an abyssal crystal, it gave me a lower chest. The second one didn't give me a crystal, it gave me a greater chest. The third one, well, it gave me an abyssal crystal, but then by this point, you've killed a good number of the monsters that are present in the abyss. That's no longer going to be the case. Even if they spawn a chest, they're also going to spawn an abyssal crystal now. So this is really substantial, especially if you're able to increase the number of pits that spawn in the area as well. Now, this is going to be important to note though. This increased difficulty and reward is something that the player base doesn't really understand what this stat does very well. My own testing of this in the past loosely indicated that it seemed to make it more likely that loot would be replaced by rarer categories of loot. So this means that armor and weapons, the two most common categories of loot and generally pretty undesirable to get, they would stop appearing very much and you would start seeing more of some of the rarer things. Now, rarer doesn't necessarily always mean super desirable. The rarest category of loot currently is Sanctum Tomes, and they're not super desirable at the current moment. But there's some things that are in a bit more demand that will also pick up in appearance rate once you have multiple stacks of this increased difficulty and reward. And of course, my testing of increased difficulty and reward wasn't particularly scientific. I'm pretty sure in that result, but it's also from a couple of patches ago now. So not 100% certain what this is going to mean, just that it does tend to be fairly impactful. This was also the stat that caused Breach Scarab of Resonant Cascade to be so popular last league. So maybe Abyss Scarab of Crystals will end up being the new Breach Scarab of Resonant Cascade, or maybe it won't quite go that far. And if anyone watching this is thinking, hey, wouldn't it be a really smart thing to go and buy a bunch of Abyss Scarab of Crystals? Well, guess what? People have already thought of that. And as soon as this announcement was first made, as soon as anyone first discussed this, the value of these things kind of exploded, as tends to be the case. And next up we have some Legion changes. Now this one's really interesting, but I do want to warn you, don't just always use this. So enshrouded items that are in a crystal of permutation can now be charged up to 3 times. They will gain variant rarity each time the crystal is charged. The higher the variant rarity is, the more likely the resultant vestigal item is to be a rarer unique item. You can break out a crystal to obtain a vestigal unique as long as you've full charged the item at least once. So where's the catch with this? Well, there are some very, very common unique items, such as Honourhome, which is equal most common unique item in the game, and these can actually be quite desirable if they get the right vestigal unique implicit on them. For example, vestigal unique implicit from the Gull ends up being extremely popular if it's on Honourhome. I'm just calling out this one particular item, but if you search around, you'll find there's a bunch of other things on the tier 5 rarity list and the tier 4 rarity list that are things that people are fairly happy to use. As an example, I am currently using this helmet in League. I am very happy with it. I consider it one of the best items on my character. This is something that I'm using despite getting absolutely nothing from the +1 to the maximum number of summoned holy relics. This is just the Gull, but better. This is the Gull, but it doesn't break my armor and energy shield mastery, and it has a whole bunch of resistances that take some of the stress off other gear. This is a fantastic item, and it's one I'd highly recommend, but it's also a tier 4 rarity unique, so not super rare. This is the sort of thing that you can definitely find with the system as it currently is. Now, anything that biases towards rarer uniques is also biasing against more common uniques. So I want you to just keep that in mind. And if you are looking for the best community efforts known to determine the unique item tiers that exist for all of the different unique items in the game, I'll put a link down in the description below to this page over on POEwiki.net. This is an incredibly useful guide. It is not 100% correct, but it is both far better than my personal memory, and it is far better than any individual player's subjective experience will be. There has been some very serious testing that's gone into this, as well as a bunch of other things like what happens when you offer a unique item into the new Atlas anomaly, the Court of Chaos. What happens if you spam 5,000 Ancient Orbs on a particular item class? What do you see? All of this has been taken into account, and this list has been compiled from it. As a general rule of thumb, if your goal is to get a tier 3 or rarer unique, then you are going to want to overcharge your vestigal item substantially. If your goal is to get a tier 4, you may only want to charge it twice. And if your goal is to get a tier 5, you absolutely positively always want to only charge it once. Next up is a buff to one of the more powerful mechanics in the game, The amount of Wildwood Wisps that you'll gain in the Viridian Wildwood, this has been increased. Certain enemy mercenary skills have had the nerf hammer applied to them. There are some of these mercenary skills that just feel completely and utterly unfair. This was the case way back in 326 when we had mercenaries the first time, but players got used to avoiding them, and also players were just really, really powerful in that league. And so when 329 came around and the mechanic went core, well, Granny Games have had to go back and do a little bit more balancing on it. Very simple quality of life pass. There is now a crafting bench in Einhar's Menagerie. This is something that has been overdue for a very long time. It's one of those things where you're constantly adding additional loading screens. And one of the things that I find most frustrating in POE2 is that there's so many of these mechanics that force you to just constantly travel to various locations and go through a long loading screen every time, maybe 2 long loading screens every time. The Well of Souls is the most egregious of these in Path of Exile 2, but Path of Exile 1, another one of them is being removed. You're not going to need to constantly bounce between your hideout and the Menagerie if you're doing specific types of crafting. Finally, offering to the deep altars in Voyages are getting a little bit of a polish pass as well. So they will now display the chance they grant for certain currencies to convert to others. They already do provide this, but they're going to actually be upfront and open to you about it. These chances are being raised, but also at the same time, these are going to be rarer altars as well. I believe one of them, for example, is a 4% chance for the rest of the voyage for Chaos Orbs to upgrade into Divine Orbs. So if that ends up being 6%, but maybe it's 1/3 rarer than it was before, there's no real change there. It's just that it's more impactful when you do get one. The intention here is that it's more noticeable when you do get one of these. Across many voyages, there will overall be a higher number of currencies converted, assuming that you are finding and interacting with these altars. And this will come alongside many other bug fixes and general improvements as usual. Now, next week, Grinding Games are planning to do a follow-up patch to this. This one is really interesting. So what they're doing here is they're providing new ways to juice up the league mechanic beyond the current limits of Voyages. Now, they're going to add in 6 cursed ducats to the game. They're just going to come from various endgame means. We haven't been told what these are. But when you get one of these, it's a quest item, it's non-tradable, and you'll be able to apply up to 3 of them at a time. So they'll just work like Voidstone sockets on the Atlas UI. Now, cursed ducats can be socketed into the Voyage UI, and once you've got 3 of them active, each one of them will ratchet up the quantity and rarity of items that are dropped by slain enemies inside chart and Voyage encounters both. But at the same time, each of the 6 comes with its own difficulty modifier as well. So you can choose to apply none of these. If you do that, you're going to have the same experience that players get right now. The same loot, the same rewards, but you're just not using this new mechanic. You can apply one of them, in which case you'll get slightly better items that drop from regular monsters there. You can apply 2, or you can apply 3. If you do apply 3, you can't go beyond that by applying all 6, because I think Grinding Games consider that would affect build viability too much, because these are all going to have some sort of drawback applied to them, some sort of nerf to your character, or some sort of buff to the monsters that are present in the zone, and some builds will deal well with this, some will not. As an example, and I'm not suggesting that this is one of the mods they're using, maybe one of them will read plus 50% rarity, plus 25% quantity, but players in the area have 75% less regeneration of life, mana, and energy shield. This is a really nasty mod. Some builds can deal with it, some builds cannot. If you're playing a build that can deal with it, then yeah, sure, you socket it. If you're not, then maybe you choose a different drawback instead. Maybe another one has minus 12% maximum resistances and you're confident you can deal with that. Or maybe another one says 20% less cast speed and you're hardly casting any spells at all. You can deal with that just fine. The exact details will be revealed later, but that's something that I think will be really interesting when we get our hands on it. So those are the changes. The big things that are coming tomorrow: expect Abyss to have better loot from regular monsters, plus better juicing options. Expect Legion to have some new options for the way that the crystals will work, and these will not always be the right choice to use, but it is strictly better to have the new options. The particular case where this will be at its best is if you want to get a rare output and you're putting in a rare input. For example, your input item is Mahoxidal's Machination and your desired output item is Aegis Aurora. In that case, you'll find that using this overcharging mechanism is going to be absolutely ideal for what you're trying to do. On the flip side though, if you're trying to get something like the Gull as your input and Honourhome as your output, then this will be actively detrimental to use. Then there's some minor changes. Otherwise, I'm gonna leave it there. May your Val Orbs have interesting results.